Since Tesla's earnings call yesterday, a lot of people have been saying Tesla really missed the mark by focusing on the Cybertruck over the next-gen vehicle. I'm here to tell you that is dead wrong, and I'll explain why. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All coming to you from my parents' house yet again. If you don't know why, I'll put a link to this video up here where I explain at the end of the video the reason why I'm traveling here. Don't want to go into too much detail about that, but anyway, it's not great news, but such is life. While I'm here, I'm going to continue to do some videos as I'm able, and I want to start on this because it relates to Tesla's earnings call, which I listened to in my car as I was driving here in my Tesla, as it was driving me. I was listening to the earnings call Wednesday evening. But anyway, if you don't know, the outlook for 2024 is a little bit kind of depressed on Tesla's part. And I don't mean that like sad, but I mean, it's just they're not going to grow very, very rapidly because they say they're sort of in between the ramp of the Model 3 and Model Y, which was a really, really big push, and also driving the cost of goods, all of that stuff down for the Model 3 and Model Y. And then there's going to be the ramp of the next gen vehicle. And what we've got right now is the ramp of the Cybertruck, which is going to produce a lot. I mean, there's a huge demand for it, regardless of what people are saying. There's going to be a demand for a very long time for over 100,000 of these per year. But A, it's going to take Tesla a long time to get to that number. And B, 100 or 200,000 a year when you're talking about multiple millions is not that big of a deal, right? So relatively small. It's not going to cause them to grow all that much. And it's also only probably a US, maybe eventually Australia, maybe some Far East markets and things like that. So it's not as global of a market as a crossover SUV is, which is the Model Y. So anyway, the result of that was after the earnings call, and to some extent before that, there have been a lot of people who have been saying that, look, they made a big mistake. Tesla really should have focused on the next gen vehicle instead of focusing on the Cybertruck, and they should have done that first. And just to pull out one example from Anthony Burke here, he said they should have prioritized a Model 2, a next gen vehicle, and a simpler truck rather than the folly of the Cybertruck. And in relation to that, I want to point out what I wrote about 6 weeks ago now, about a month and a half ago, something like that. And that was, I think all the hype about the Cybertruck is missing the even bigger picture. Cybertruck is to the next gen vehicle as the Model S was to the Model 3. Cybertruck is not about Cybertruck. So let me explain a little bit what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is that the next gen vehicle, Elon has said over and over again, and not just him, but other people too, who are involved in this, including Franz von Holzhausen and also in Walter Isaacson's biography, etc., that this next gen vehicle, it sounds like it from the earnings call that it might be really interesting design. I think there's an indication that it might be mind-blowing design that people are not expecting. So that'll be really cool to see. But the bigger picture, more important aspect of this is how it's made. The sort of factory, the machine that builds the machine, and the fact that they're having to manufacture different robots, parts, etc., in the factory itself to be able to build this Gen 2 vehicle, Gen 3 vehicle, whatever you want to call it, at a kind of a scale that they want to build it at. They're looking at, trying to build somewhere around 5 or 10 million of these per year eventually by like the end of this decade. So in order to do that, which is bigger than any other vehicle, I think the largest amount has been on the order of like 1 million or so, which is what the Model Y I think is about 1.2 million in 2023. So that's kind of like the maximum number of one model of vehicle that's ever been produced. And so we're looking at something that's kind of an order of magnitude bigger than that. You're going from about 1 million of one model of vehicle to about 10 million of one model of vehicle. So you have to change things a lot in order to build it at that kind of rate, and in order to make it cost effective and cost efficient so that it comes in at somewhere around $25,000 to $30,000 base price for that vehicle, you have to have incredible amount of new technology in a vehicle. You can't manufacture this vehicle the way that all of the other ones have always been made. So the starting point obviously is things like gigacasting and stuff like that. That was a huge advance in the Model Y and then into the Model 3 that allowed them to build it much, much faster, because instead of something like 150, I think it's a lot of parts and processes to build the front and back of the vehicle, they were able to just stamp these things out. Now, the technology had to be invented and the materials had to be invented, all of that kind of stuff. So it was a very, very challenging prospect to do that. But once they get to that point, you have a very much faster way of building the vehicle. Then the structural battery pack, which has been in some Model Ys and in the Cybertruck for sure, and we'll see, it's going to pretty much have to be in the next gen vehicle as well in order for Tesla to be able to produce them at the kind of speed and at the kind of cost efficiency that they're going to need to do. So my prediction again is that they're going to do a single piece gigacasting that will have a pretty substantial front and back, just like the Model 3 and Model Y. And then it will have some sort of rails that will be very, very lightweight, just some sort of thing that you will drop the structural battery pack into. But the reason why you would do that is so you can stamp the whole thing at one go, right? So it's just like, bam, you stamp it. And the reason why you have the rails is just to keep the front and back rigid, so that you just pop it out of the GigaPress, you put it down, you drop the structural battery pack in, or you put the tops on, whatever you want to do, however you want to manufacture it. But basically you have a single piece there and you don't have to do any fudging. It's already rigidly designed. Now, Tesla has talked about the unboxing process, how they're going to do the front separately from the middle part, separately from the back, and they'll put those all together later. But I still think that works with a single piece gigacasting. So, that is one place that they definitely wanted to explore larger stuff with the Cybertruck. And if you remember from the factory tour and from the delivery event and everything, that one of the big advances was, and this was Elon talking to Sandy Munro, is that the Cybertruck was able to create the, I think it's the front gigacasting, if I'm remembering correctly. One of the two, I believe it was the front one. They were able to create that with the same size gigapress that they do the Model Y on currently. So they didn't have to get a bigger press. Now for the back, they did have to get a bigger one, but this allows a lot of efficiency in terms of just getting material flow and redesigning the part and everything so that you can have that gigacasting that you can do with a smaller press. And what that means is if you look at a larger press, then you're able to do more casting. So again, I really think that they're going to try hard to make the whole kind of body a complete unibody single part. And again, it's not for the structural part in the middle, it's more to put rails there. And the reason for it is not for the structuralness of it, because the battery itself will be the middle part of the structural integrity of the vehicle, but it's just to make it all rigid so that you have this consistent thing that you don't have to fudge with it all, right? You just take it off and you put the parts on that you want from the unbox process, right? You put the front on, you put the back on, you put the whatever parts you want to put on, you pop up the bottom, the battery pack with the seats attached to it, and the car is ready to go. So you don't have to do any kind of like wiggling around and processes and, all sorts of welding and all kinds of things that, you currently have to do to make a vehicle. So that's number one. And the Cybertruck was a Pathfinder for that. That's the thing that they needed to be able to see how it was going to work. And you want to do it at a lower volume vehicle first. And this is the TLDR of this whole thing, if I'm blabbing on too long, is that the Cybertruck is a Pathfinder. It's a way for Tesla to figure out how to do the processes that they want to use in their next gen vehicle. Number one, biggest gigacasting that they can find, which is the entire vehicle. They already have a patent for this. I think it's been approved. It's at least been applied for. But anyway, they've got a patent for a single piece gigacasting. So that's number one. Number two, of course, is 48 volt architecture. They need to reduce the amount of copper in the vehicle. They need to upgrade the parts to very, very modern parts. So 48 volt, overall architecture for the low voltage stuff to run the displays, to run the battery management system, to run the steering, braking, all of that kind of stuff. So that's the next piece, and they needed the Cybertruck as a Pathfinder for that. So again, Cybertruck on the order of 100,000 or 200,000 per year as it ramps. So again, a Pathfinder, because we're talking about 2 orders of magnitude, right? So we're going from like 100,000 to 1 million to 10 million. So 2 orders of magnitude less. That, even though it seems like 100,000 or 200,000 vehicles is a big amount, that is small potatoes compared to what Tesla is looking at doing with the next gen vehicle. So again, Cybertruck Pathfinder for Gigapress, Cybertruck Pathfinder for 48 volt architecture, and Cybertruck Pathfinder for doing steer-by-wire. And steer-by-wire, of course, dissociates the steering wheel from the vehicle itself, from the turning of the vehicle, because you've got actuators in the vehicle itself. And Elon said, I believe, again, this was with Sandy Munro, he said that they had to, or maybe it was Franz that said, I can't remember who said it, sorry, it could have been Lars, but one of the engineers said that they had to go to 48 volt architecture because the motors at 12 volts would have been too large and bulky to fit in and to operate efficiently. They would have generated too much heat, blah, blah, blah. Because when the Cybertruck is still, it's very, very heavy. And so there needs a huge amount of torque to be able to rotate the wheels back and forth. So they were able to figure out how to do that. And 48 volts was crucial with that. But the steer-by-wire is going to be absolutely crucial with the next-gen vehicle for a couple of reasons. Number one, it just makes the vehicle lighter. There are fewer parts and things like that, so that's great. That's, in some ways it's important because, again, you're manufacturing a lot of those. Number two, it's going to allow right-hand and left-hand versions of the next-gen vehicle to be produced very, very easily. And one of the reasons I think that the Cybertruck is probably going to come out in Australia and other right-hand drive areas relatively quickly, as soon as Tesla can somewhat meet the demand in the United States and Canada, is that they can swap it because you no longer have this giant thing, that's connecting the steering column to the steering wheel. You can more or less just go and you can move the steering wheel over to the right-hand side, no big deal. So all of that kind of stuff allows you to be able to make these changes. And that's important too, because again, if you're mass manufacturing this, you can't only mass manufacture it for left-hand drive and then have a whole other vehicle for right-hand drive. So I'm sure that that's going to be built in, that you may not see it, but it'll be one of those things where they can easily kind of modularly swap out the left and right portions of the vehicle. So you put the glove box on the left, take the pedals, move them over to the right, take the steering wheel, move it over to the right. The main screen stays where it is because that's the main screen. So all of that stuff makes that a lot easier, which again allows much faster volume of production for a vehicle if you don't have to worry about that. And then the third part is very important, and this was from Walter Isaacson's biography, which is that, Musk really, really wanted this to be a robotaxi only with no steering wheel. And so they're manufacturing this, Franz and the team kind of convinced him to go with a steering wheel for now, but have one that's easily removable. Well, how do you easily remove it? It's steer-by-wire, because the steer-by-wire means that ultimately the computer is telling the car how to steer at this point anyway, so the steering wheel is unnecessary if you have proper control. So that just allows them to just go whoosh and just take that out, replace it with just a blank, again, maybe a glove box on the right-hand side, I don't know what, but just some sort of blank thing there, and take away the pedals, and you've got a robotaxi. So you've got a design in this next-gen vehicle that will allow you to go left-hand drive, right-hand drive, and robotaxi all very, very easily due to steer-by-wire. And again, the Cybertruck is not just a technology pathfinder in this case, right, which is very important because you have to figure out how to do that, and the fact you need a 48-volt architecture, all of that kind of stuff. But it's also a regulatory pathfinder. It was the thing that they had to be able to get NHTSA to approve of allowing steer-by-wire on highways without any mechanical backup system, and clearly Tesla was able to do that. So again, kudos to them for that. And you can see how the Cybertruck, being the low volume, not important vehicle, if it had taken them another year for the Cybertruck to come out, no big deal, it wouldn't have mattered. If it had taken them a year less, no big deal, it wouldn't have mattered. It's not a make or break for the company, whereas the next gen vehicle kind of is that. It's that big of a vehicle, it's that important of it. So the Cybertruck, again, perfect instance to test, to pathfind all of this kind of stuff. And then the last piece of the puzzle, and the other reason why we needed Tesla needed the Cybertruck as a pathfinder vehicle, is because of the CAN bus, the gigabit speed CAN bus, which is the Ethernet loop that goes through the Cybertruck that allows for a huge reduction in wiring and a huge efficiency in terms of the central processing unit communicating with all of the elements, like the speakers and the wheels and the sensors and the cameras and blah, 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 you name it, and the window roller up or down or all of that kind of stuff. Like, all of those things are now connected to this Ethernet loop that's in there, this Ethernet ring, and that allows them to be much, much more efficient, not just with wiring and everything, which it does, but also just in terms of compute efficiency and everything, because they don't have to have all of these dedicated little side processors and things like that that are taking up some of the slack in terms of doing work because of low communication speed. So this is another place where they needed a relatively low volume, kind of low risk vehicle. I mean, the Cybertruck, yeah, I know it's got kind of an emotional risk and everything to Tesla, but if the Cybertruck was a flop, it really wouldn't matter. And honestly, Tesla would still probably call it a win. It's not going to be, it's going to be very, very popular. Quite clearly, people are in love with this thing. But even if it was a complete flop, it would be a complete win for Tesla because of all these technologies that they figured out how to do, and they're figuring out how to ramp them onto the order of 100,000 or 200,000 per year. And and then they have to, you know, 2 orders of magnitude up from that, they have to go to get the next gen vehicle, but at least they've got sort of a proving ground to figure this out. And then of course, finally is the factory, the machine that builds the machine. The Cybertruck is a proving ground, and we're in Texas. So the next gen vehicle is going to be built right next door to the Cybertruck initially. And very good call on their part. I know originally they were thinking about Mexico, but a really good call to build it right next to where the Cybertruck line is being built, because they can figure out how to take the technology, the tools, the things that, again, they're inventing for the Cybertruck, you know, including like an air press and stuff like that. They can take that technology and move it over to the next gen vehicle as they need to. And it's just walking down, you know, walking a few meters away from the Cybertruck line over to the next gen vehicle line, instead of having to be like, you know, half a continent away or 700 miles away or something like that. So very, very easy for them to make the transition, because they've got their engineering staff there. They're already pathfinding and proving out the factory in order to figure out how the best way to make this all work goes. And that, I think, is another genius move on Tesla's part. So there you have it overall. Number one, we've got what I imagine, they have not announced this, but I imagine we're going to see a single piece giga casting for the next gen vehicle proved out with the Cybertruck, because they went to bigger casting, so they were able to figure out how to do that. Number two, 48 volt architecture. Number three, steer by wire. Number four, the high speed CAN bus that's in there, gigabit CAN bus, Ethernet loop, whatever you want to call it, and power over Ethernet. All of that stuff is a huge advantage. And then the last gigantic advantage in the Pathfinder of the Cybertruck line is the factory itself, and figuring out how to construct a new vehicle like this from scratch. And this shows Elon Musk and Tesla playing 4D chess here, because again, they're not doing a research project that ultimately won't make any money in order to try to figure out how to do the next gen vehicle and then spend 5 years goofing around and trying to figure out how to optimize it and all that stuff. They're using a profit maker, now not quite yet because the Cybertruck doesn't have enough volume, but eventually it's going to drive some profit, or at least cover the cost of a lot of this research, because us consumers are going to purchase the product. So just like with full self-driving that Tesla's been working on for almost a decade, but they've been charging for it, and so they've been making back some of the money at least that they've spent on research. We've got the same thing with the next gen vehicle. The next gen vehicle is like, okay, how do we manufacture this thing? How do we do all the research in this? But at the same time, Tesla is also going to make a profit, or at least a break even on this, by selling Cybertrucks. So they're creating these research things and also monetizing them. And I think that's one of the most genius things that Elon Musk and others around him, of course, because he's not all by himself doing this stuff, but one of the most genius things he's figured out how to do, and the Tesla team has figured out how to do, is to do the R&D, but not have to devote 5 or 10 years before you see a profit on it. It's like, make a product that people will buy, and then take that product that people will buy and utilize that research to figure out how to do the next product. You could see that in the Model S to the Model 3. And then, and again, we're going to see that with the Cybertruck to the next gen vehicle, I predict. And then you're able to keep monetizing this stuff and keep your company in good shape financially. And everyone was freaking out about how bad the financials were this quarter and everything. But remember, Tesla's got 29.1 or whatever billion dollars. I don't know. I guess I'll take the 0.1 if they want to send it to me. But you know, they've got a huge amount of cash in reserve and no long-term debt. So they're in incredibly good shape versus every other auto manufacturer. And it means they could just lose money for the next several years and still be fine, because they would just start absorbing some of that free cash. But they don't have to, because they're genius enough to be able to get people to pay for them to do the R&D. And so they're not having to wait until it's all completely done before they get some of that money back. And I really do feel like the Cybertruck, one of the reasons why it took 4 years to come out rather than sooner was because so much new technology was built in there, and they really, really shot for the moon on that. But I'm convinced it's not just all about the Cybertruck, but most of the major advances they made are going to directly translate to the new next-gen vehicle. And they're figuring out right now how to do it efficiently, cheaply, and quickly. And that's really, really genius on Tesla's part. So if you think focusing on the Cybertruck before the next-gen vehicle was a huge mistake, I am here to tell you that I completely disagree. I think it's exactly the opposite. It was a genius move on their part to focus on that. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments, even if you disagree with me. Again, remember to be nice about that, but you can be constructive. I take the criticism. I would love to hear what you have to say about that. Be sure to like and subscribe, check out the merch store and all that stuff, and I will see you in the next one.